Good morning. My name is Mary Liz Walsh, and the topic of my presentation is river restoration in Dublin City, the challenges and opportunities on the River Camac in the face of flood risk management, urban renewal, and climate change. To give a brief introduction to the Camac River, I have a map here showing the full catchment. It's a largely urbanized catchment. It's a very historical river. It was an industrial river. Currently, there are different land uses and different associated pressures. We have the added complexity of a complicated flood regime. We estimate 400 buildings at risk from fluvial flooding at present. The catchment is divided across two local authority areas, Dublin City Council and South Dublin. The status currently ranges from good to poor. It's good in the uplands, where the catchment is at its most natural, and as soon as it becomes more urbanized and more developed, it turns to moderate there. In the newer industrial areas, and it goes to poor when it reaches Clondalkin village and it becomes more historical. The development is more historical from there on. There's a large industrial zone in the centre, and as it approaches its outfall in Houston, it becomes increasingly urbanised. So the key pressures are wastewater. I'm including a photo here of a metal chamber protruding from the surface of the river. It tells us a little bit about the history of the river and how it would have been used as an open sewer in its history. And another key pressure would be urban runoff. So I have a photo here of the M50. The Camac River drains a large section of the M50. It also drains significant stretches of the N7 and the Long Mile Road, along with the other urban runoff pressures. I've included two photos here just as a contrast to show the hydromorphology. That's going to be the main thrust of this presentation today. So the photo on the bottom left is taken from the uplands, where the status is good. It's a pristine scene, very natural looking, very attractive. And the photo on the top right is of Old Kilmainham. So you can see the difference between the two. The Old Kilmainham shot is not without its charm, but it's very it has departed from its natural condition quite substantially. So the physical restoration of the river, I suppose we are in a sense trying to retrofit a natural scene such as that in the uplands into an historic urban core like Old Kilmainham. So that just illustrates the challenges really associated with this kind of work. So I suppose all of the key pressures, really, the solutions to them all are found in natural water retention measures mainly. So what are known as HIMO natural water retention measures for the physical restoration of the river channel and its direct environs. And then the urban ones, also known as SUDs, for the urban runoff and the wastewater pressures. So we know really from research that a natural river is a healthy river, and that a healthy river is a robust river in the face of new challenges such as climate change and new development. So the renaturalization of a river is of increasing importance. So just to look at hydromorphology in the lower catchment, lengthy culverts would be one feature. This is one culvert here in Bluebell. It's 600 meters in length. It's one of many. Ecologically, it's a dead zone. It couldn't be more artificial. There is no space for riparian zones, total loss of floodplains, and there's no light, which obviously fish don't like either. This is an example of channelization. It's a section of the river in Inchicore village. It has been artificially straightened and it has been narrowed here. As you can see, the riparian corridor has been obliterated. No storage for flooding, and very little to provide any kind of sustenance for the ecology that we are trying to promote. This is another example in one of the industrial zones, also in Bluebell. It's a little bit more natural than the previous photos in that one side of the river is not concrete. It's a natural earthen bank, and the base of the river appears to be earthen also. But you can see how certain degree of land reclamation has taken place. So the palisade fencing is right tight to the river there, so eroding again the floodplains and the riparian zones, and there's some slope stability issues here. So flood storage and habitats go hand in hand. Support of river processes, support to allow the river to flood in a controlled manner, to support erosion and deposition, and also the connectivity with groundwater is so important in renaturalizing a river and creating these and maintaining and supporting these processes that are so important for ecology. Base flow is of particular importance in the face of climate change and maintaining correct temperatures in warm conditions. These are some examples of some modifications in the mid to upper catchments. The first photo here, the channel has been over deepened. This is a photo from one of the public parks. So it probably dates back to when there were several mills lining the banks of the Camac, and they needed lots of fast flowing water to power the many mills. But now this over deepening means that the water bursts its banks less, and that more water actually goes downstream and can cause flooding in built up areas. So that's something that these are elements that we're looking at in the restoration of this river. The British Pond then at the very close to its source is also modified. There's a weir here. This would have been one of the key mill ponds for the many mills that lined the banks also. So when we're thinking of hydromorphology, it's not a static catchment. We're tackling existing hymo pressures, but we're also trying to avoid making unnecessary new ones. So I have just a snapshot here from the Natural Water Retention Measures website. It's a NEU website. The features that are listed here would be those that would be very typical of a natural river: basins and ponds, wetlands, floodplain restoration, remeandering, and natural stream beds. So these are all features that are often lost in urban rivers, and the restoration, the physical restoration of a river really involves trying to put some of these features back and trying to protect the ones that remain. This would be a feature that we'd be trying to protect. It is a modification. It is Drimna Castle in just off the Long Mile Road. The moat there, it's the only flooded moat in Ireland, and it's fed by a tributary of the Camac. So hydromorphology, I suppose we are examining the various opportunities and challenges within the catchment. There are numerous projects and initiatives that are taking place. It's in County Dublin, so there's always a lot happening in the catchment, and each of these constitutes its own opportunities, and they also interact with each other. So the Camac Flood Alleviation Study, so that's led by DCC together with South Dublin. So I'm the client's rep for that, and it's funded by the OPW. So we're looking at opportunities to maximise existing green space, and we're seeking opportunities for new space. We're also conscious of all the rezoning of industrial lands that's taking place within the catchment, and that opportunities are identified as part of that. And development control is very important for the development of individual sites. The Camac Greenway is another project that is on the horizon, and that's something, again, that has to be done sensitively for the river so that we can achieve synergies. And I suppose in order to maximise the opportunities and in order to best manage those challenges, we require a plan. So an overall river restoration plan is something we're putting together in DCC, and the identification of synergies really is key to that. So this photo is something, is one that has been given to us by the River Restoration Centre. So it just shows a town centre scene. We'd be quite used to seeing walls that closely follow the line of the river. So here, the walls are set back a little bit. So again, providing a little bit of extra storage for the river. The river has a little bit more room, and it's also very attractive for amenity and is also helpful for ecology and biodiversity. So these are the kind of synergies that we're trying to identify. So with the Camac River Rehabilitation Scheme, we're aware of certain considerations. In advance, we were aware that the current hydromorphological condition of the lower catchment is part of the reason why the river is at risk of not achieving good status by 2027. We are conscious that that there may not be sufficient existing green space to provide a complete floodplain storage solution, and to implement all of the necessary hydromorphological natural water retention measures. And we're very conscious that in a kind of a constrained environment that flood walls are very likely to be required, and definitely I would say, but we're mindful that of the impacts of these new flood walls on the hydromorphological condition, and also the impacts of raising the heights of some of the existing walls socially as well as environmentally. The lengthy culverts in private lands then is another complication. So I have a cross-section here. It's one that Conor Skehan from DIT put together for us in 2018. It shows an idealized cross-section of the river. So it divides the river up into zones. So I suppose if we're going to achieve these kind of co-benefits for the different projects, then I suppose we're trying to identify things that can happen together, things that can happen that are mutually supportive, and trying to separate the activities then that would be in conflict. So the center zone there would be the river itself. So just water access, maybe just maintenance, maybe some canoeing where it's deemed appropriate. Then we have the natural riverbank, where we allow occasional access, so maybe some picnic areas, fishing. Zone 3, the floodplain. So within this zone 3, we would be hoping to contain the 100-year flood. So this is kind of tied into the flood mapping exercise, which makes it useful to us. So outside the flood zone, then I suppose that's when you're into the main catchment, and you're looking at the urban natural water retention measures as opposed to the HIMO. So the HIMO would be in the flood zone; they would be the ones that you would use, and then outside it would be SUDS, or what's now called the urban natural water retention measures. Some of you would be familiar with this document. There's similar cross sections in that. It's very beautifully presented. So we're aware that there is a need to plan the whole catchment. Typically, in-stream measures are not sufficient for status improvements, but there would be areas where there is not where we don't have space to do anything else. This example is a town in the UK. The river has been over-widened. That's not the issue we have mainly on the Camac. It's been overly narrowed, but it's interesting nonetheless. It was an eyesore. There was a sedimentation problem, and what they did was they dug out the sediment, they created these meanders within the channel, and then vegetated them. So it has been shown through modelling not to interfere with the capacity of the river to convey its floodwaters, and it's considered much more attractive by the local people. But we must work to restore all of the river processes, so not just erosion and deposition. This example is like a stent, if you like. So it doesn't include the outer bank measures, but it does help limit the impact on the downstream areas. But to restore all the river processes would be to allow some flooding to support erosion and deposition because they're necessary, and also the connectivity with groundwater, and then the wider catchment as well, and managing runoff. So really, for all of these things, we need land. So it's something that we can't do on our own. So collaboration with public bodies like the OPW, other council departments, and the local community are absolutely critical. And the element of forward planning is vital. So this requirement for zoning has been identified in the Eastern Midland Region RSS document. And the department is working on the development of guidelines for this. So this is just a little analysis of the catchment. This text here, I won't go through it, but people can go back to it if they wish when they're looking at the presentation. So I'll just get straight into the analysis here. So this is Inchicore in the bottom left, and at the end of the river's course there we have Houston Station. So this area, especially in Old Kilmainham and Inchicore here, it's an emerging tourism quarter. Well, when I say emerging, I mean we have Kilmainham Jail there just on the banks of the river, but this is a trend that is growing. So along the river here we have the mill, Kilmainham Mill. It's shown on the right here. This is an historical building that was bought by Dublin City Council. So the plan for this is that it will also kind of tie in with this emerging tourism quarter. Across the riverbanks, we have this very substantial flood wall. There was near loss of life in this location back in 2011. So this is a very important wall currently. So I suppose I'm just showing this to illustrate, I suppose, what impact socially further raising of the flood walls might have. I mean, protection of life is absolutely paramount, and we may well need to raise these walls, but I suppose it just highlights the need to maximise the more natural approaches where possible. So additional floodplain storage is very difficult to achieve in a built-up area like this. So this is just to show you some of the flooding as modelled by the CFRAM. So we have some green areas mainly to the north of the river, but unfortunately the flooding is mainly to the south. But there are some opportunities to possibly do something there. As you cross the South Circular Road, it's a lot more built up, so opportunities are limited. But there are some of these industrial sites that are underutilised at the moment, and we're possibly hopeful that some additional space could be created there. Something a bit like the photo I showed earlier, that would have an amenity value as well as a flooding benefit. Just to show you the historical map here, we can see the large pond there in Grattan Crescent. It also highlights, I suppose, that there were 2 channels here historically, and now we're down to 1. This mill race running to the north, we believe, is still in existence, most of it at least. So I suppose that is something that we are hoping to explore with the flood alleviation study, whether it would be possible to use this capacity if we can't secure any more land down here. So outside the M50, the volumes go up quite a bit as the river crosses over the M50. There are some large tributaries that join in this area, so additional storage, floodplain storage, would be ideal here. We have one large park. I've highlighted in green, Lansdowne Valley Park. The purple lines are some of the large culverts. So I suppose finding space for natural floodplains here is challenging, but this is one of the areas that is going to be subject to urban renewal. So we may have opportunities in the future. So we're hoping to prevent new pressures, and we're using the tools that are available to us. Among those, we've been developing a hydromorphology assessment, and we're going to roll that out together with the OPW, and we're hoping that some of it will be done as part of the flood alleviation scheme. And so we want to define and understand the problems, and then we can assess then what the opportunities are and the various impacts of the challenges. So this is the flooding map here, just to overlay it again to highlight the additional space that would be required. So just here are some of the areas that are going to be subject to urban renewal, and there are more. So new opportunities will present themselves to preserve existing floodplains and riparian zones, and to reinstate historical ones, hopefully. It will also allow us to tackle some other water framework directive pressures, and by providing things like buffer zones along some of those main roads. So outside of the M50, we have a lot more space. Kirka Park being one of the key ones. It's a fabulous resource. And I've just shown a photo here from the UK that shows, I suppose, a small urban river that is probably better connected with its floodplains, and just as a contrast in terms of how it's treated within the park. And we've had a look at the British Pond already. So protecting floodplains and riparian zones for rivers that have already been modified is definitely challenging, because we have to find out where things were, and especially where culverts exist and floodplains have been removed. So it's retrofit then, if we're to broaden it out and look at the wider river restoration to good status. So it's retrofit is another thing that needs to be supported through zoning. But the need for a solid basis for zoning decisions is paramount, and finding the evidence really is key. So it is under this that we've developed this hydromorphology assessment with the River Restoration Centre. And as I said, we're planning to use this in part to understand the river catchment and the hydromorphological condition as part of the flood alleviation study. So just, I suppose, when we're assessing the different parts of the river and looking at the different roles that the river has to play, these would be some of the considerations. So the morphology of the river, water quality, we spoke a little bit about that at the beginning, the capacity of the river to take development, to take industrial discharges or runoff, the need for support for biodiversity, particular habitats, the flow levels required to maintain them, and then I suppose the human element, then the requirement for recreation and amenity. So these are all the various questions that need to be asked when planning certain sections of the river. So some things are mutually supportive and some are in conflict. So it's about figuring out these things in advance. So just a synopsis then, achieving the balance between the Water Framework Directive, the Floods Directive, and all the other things that are happening in the catchment, the need for housing, healthy working environments, climate change adaptation. So achieving synergies first really is so important, and to do that we need a very full and proper understanding of what's going on. Making room for the river seems to be the only way to achieve a full physical restoration of the river. It's not possible everywhere, but that should be the intention. We need hardworking multi-purpose green space, which sometimes requires a change in mindset. Rewilding sometimes is seen as wasted land, but this is not the case. We need to recognize that when we strip out nature, we make ourselves vulnerable to climate change, to pollution, to all of the stresses of urban living. So the importance of forward planning and integrated catchment planning can't really be overstated. So if any of you have questions, I'd like you to refer them to the app, please, and I would be delighted to answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you very much.